Before Tupac's name echoed across the globe, his godmother was already stamped as one of America's most wanted. She just passed away in Cuba at the age of 78, but the last words she spoke about Pac, they crack open the truth about his murder that no one ever dared to piece together. And what she revealed about who really silenced him might flip everything you thought you knew. This is bigger than just headlines. This is about family, about bloodlines, about the kind of bond that shaped hip-hop's truest rebel voice. 2025 just took another soldier from the culture. Assata Shakur, the sister whose name has been echoing in streets, prisons, and courtrooms for half a century, died in Havana, Cuba on September 25th. 78 years lived, and she left this world the same way she lived it, on her terms, free, unbroken, and untouchable, no matter how heavy the government pressed. But here's the thing, this isn't just a story of her passing. It's about legacy. It's about how the spirit of a godmother poured into her godson, and how that connection forged the rawest, most authentic voice hip-hop ever heard. Assata wasn't just some chapter in a dusty Black History Month textbook. She was Tupac Shakur's godmother, his people, his foundation, and the ties between them ran way deeper than most ever realized. To understand it, you've got to roll the clock back, way back. She was born Joan Deborah Byron on July 16, 1947 in Queens, New York, the same borough that later birthed 50 Cent and a long line of lyrical killers. From the jump, her life was baptized in struggle. Her parents split when she was just 3, as she bounced between New York and the Jim Crow South of North Carolina, where racism wasn't some idea. It was the ground you walked on and the system crushing your chest every single day. Money was scarce, and young Joan kept running from home, chasing something she couldn't name. Everything shifted when she went to live with her aunt, Evelyn A. Williams, a civil rights lawyer who became her guide. She put Joan on track, helped her earn her GED, and pushed her toward higher education. Imagine this: early 20s, a young Black woman walking into Borough of Manhattan Community College and then City College of New York in the mid-1960s. The country was on fire. Malcolm X was preaching. The Panthers were rising. Revolution was the air, and Joan was right there, stepping straight into the storm. She dove headfirst into the struggle, joining campus protests that demanded more Black professors and the creation of a Black Studies department. By 1967, she caught her very first arrest during a sit-in at BMCC. That wasn't just rebellion, it was a rebirth. It was an awakening, a transformation. A young Black woman realizing the so-called education she'd been fed was pure fabrication. The schools had been pumping out lies, scrubbing history clean, cutting out the brutality this country had unleashed on its own Black citizens. The contradictions tore at her until Joan Deborah Byron shed that government name. She rebirthed herself as Assata Shakur, she who struggles for the people, and the thankful one. That's deeper than a name. That was destiny written in syllables, her purpose, her fight, her life's mission carried in every letter. By 1970, still a college student, she linked with the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party. What pulled her in? That 10-point program that wasn't about slogans, it was about survival. The Panthers weren't preaching theory, they were building reality. Free breakfast programs for the babies, community clinics for the sick, schools for the people. And Assata wasn't watching from the sidelines. She moved to Oakland, the Panthers HQ, to organize and educate. Then she came back to Harlem to lead on the ground. There, she pushed programs that fed thousands of kids, delivered healthcare to those who couldn't afford a doctor, and spread knowledge where ignorance had been weaponized. This wasn't photo op politics. This was tangible change. Bellies full, bodies healed, minds sharpened. That was the Panther mission, and Assata carried it heavy. But it wasn't all unity inside the movement. She started noticing the ego, the sexism, the shallow grasp of history from some of the brothers in the ranks. And soon, cracks spread through the Panthers themselves, infighting, power struggles, sabotage, like a legendary rap crew breaking apart. But this time the consequences weren't about music. They were life and death. And lurking behind it all, a quiet, calculated hand undermining the movement, a covert assault that felt less like friendly fire and more like war. I believe every U.S. administration, really, all of them in recent memory, has been set on breaking the Cuban people, crushing their fight for freedom and dignity, and labeling Assata a terrorist. That was just their excuse, a way of saying, we've got a right to go in and snatch her. That kind of move could have sparked a major clash between the nations that, in my lifetime, have never known peace. Then February 1971 hit. and the Panthers exploded from the inside. Eldridge Cleaver went on national TV blasting Huey Newton, and Newton clapped back by expelling him. The fallout was bloody, 4 Panthers dead, and hundreds walking away from the movement. And behind the curtains, the FBI's dirty fingerprints all over a COINTELPRO, spreading lies, forging letters, planting poison to tear the brothers apart. Out of that wreckage came the Black Liberation Army, the Panthers' younger, more militant branch. East Coast soldiers who were done with speeches and ready to bring the war straight to the streets. They studied guerrilla tactics from Vietnam, from Algeria, from real revolutionaries overseas. And by 1971, Assata Shakur had left the Panthers behind and linked with the BLA, ready to carry the struggle on a more dangerous level. But while all this was happening, another chapter of the story was being written. On June 16, 1971, in East Harlem, a baby boy entered the world, Laysane Parish Crooks. But this wasn't just any child. He was the son of Afeni Shakur, a Panther warrior who beat the Panther 21 conspiracy case while pregnant with him. Imagine that, facing down the system, walking out free, belly full of Tupac. That's legendary. Then, in 1975, Afeni married Mulu Shakur. And Mulu wasn't some regular brother off the block, he was a doctor, an acupuncturist healing addicts in Harlem, and at the same time, a soldier in the blood trenches. He was also Assata's brother. That marriage officially tied Assata into Tupac's life, not just as a relative, but as his godmother. And that role? It was more than showing up with gifts. It was guidance. It was protection. It was passing down the spirit of rebellion. The boy born as Laysane Parish Crooks would be reborn with a name that carried a revolution on its back, Tupac Amaru Shakur, named after the Incan revolutionary Tupac Amaru II. That wasn't just a name. That was prophecy. That was a mission. You don't give your child the name of a rebel king and expect him to grow up chasing the 925. You feel me? As a kid, Tupac grew up in a world steeped in Panther stories, tales of struggle, sacrifice, and constant government heat. In a 1991 sit-down with Davy D, Pac laid it out plain: Mulu Shakur is my stepfather. Assata Shakur is my auntie. You feel me? I come from a strong line of Panthers and revolutionaries. That wasn't bragging. That was testimony. That was him claiming his bloodline. Even as a teenager, Pac was channeling that legacy. He was writing poetry for Panthers locked down behind bars, poems that carried the weight of pain, injustice, and the fight for freedom he witnessed daily. Revolution wasn't some theory in a book for him, it was life. It was the soundtrack at home, the energy at the dinner table, the oxygen in the room. But destiny had some harsh turns in store for this family of fighters. On May 2nd, 1973, Assata and the BLA soldiers were stopped on the New Jersey Turnpike for nothing more than a busted taillight. What unfolded next became one of the most disputed cases in modern American history, a blazing shootout that ended with State Trooper Werner Forster dead, one Panther killed, and Assata critically injured. She later testified, "I was shot with my hands in the air. I was accused of dozens of crimes. Except for the trooper's murder, I was acquitted on all of them. And even on that charge, I was convicted by an all-white jury in one of the most biased counties in the state, where 70% already believed I was guilty before the trial even started. The facts backed her. No gunpowder on her hands. Doctors swearing her wounds left her physically incapable of firing a gun." But in 1977, that jury handed her life plus 26 years, what folks in the hood call a straight-up legal lynching. And then came the moment that etched her name into legend. November 2nd, 1979. The night Assata Shakur didn't just escape prison, she escaped into history. A move so bold, so defiant, it felt like a movie script. But this wasn't Hollywood. This was real life. This was like a prison break ripped straight from an action flick. 3 armed soldiers rolled up to Clinton Correctional Facility for women, sliding in as visitors with fake IDs like they were just there on family business. But they weren't coming for handshakes. They were coming for war. Linked to the BLA and the May 19th Communist Organization. They pulled out .45s and even brought along a stick of dynamite. They moved with military precision, took Tecio's hostage and ran the whole operation clean. No blood spilled. They jacked a prison van, gunned it across a field like it was a video game, then ditched it for the getaway cars waiting nearby. The whole mission was bankrolled by a $15,000 hit on a hamburger store in Paramus, New Jersey. That's what guerrilla warfare looked like in America, funding revolution, one score at a time. And just like that, Assata Shakur disappeared into the underground. A ghost, a symbol, living proof that the U.S. system, with all its power, still couldn't cage her. For young Tupac, only 8 years old, when it all went down, his godmother became larger than life. She wasn't just family anymore. She was legend. She was proof that with brains, courage, and commitment, you could outsmart the empire. But the family carried heavy costs. Mutulu Shocker was eventually taken down in 1986 for armed robbery and helping Assata escape. He stayed locked up until 2022 and passed away in 2023. That's the price of revolution whole families paying in years, in blood, and time stolen. Assata herself hid in Pittsburgh for nearly a year, then slipped to the Bahamas before finally landing in Cuba in 1984. Fidel Castro granted her asylum, calling her a target of political persecution, a decision that made her a permanent pawn in the chess match between Washington and Havana. By the time Assata touched Cuban soil, Pac was about 13, and no travel bans and her fugitive status kept them from meeting in person. The bond never broke. Afeni kept Assata's name alive in the Shocker household, passing her story to her son like holy scripture. Tupac soaked it all in, and when he finally picked up the mic, what came out wasn't just music. It was testimony. It was prophecy. It was the truth, dressed up in rhythm and rhyme. On his 1991 debut album, Apocalypse Now, Pac made it crystal clear who shaped his worldview. In the outro of Words of Wisdom, he shouted them out one by one. New African Panthers, America's Nightmare. Mutulu Shocker, America's Nightmare. Geronimo Pratt, America's Nightmare. Assata Shocker, America's Nightmare. No subliminals, no sugarcoating. Pac was planting his flag, showing the world his lineage, his mentors, his values. That record was about black unity and resistance, with Assata placed shoulder to shoulder with icons like Malcolm X and Huey Newton. But here's the question nobody asks. What did Assata actually think of Tupac? This is the piece that hits different, especially for people who swear they understand Pac's story. Because of her exile in Cuba, Assata rarely spoke on Pac. Most mentions were secondhand, filtered through activists or tucked away in underground publications. But researchers dug up one rare gem that shifts the whole perspective. An interview conducted after 1996 by Chinonje Kenyel of the New African People's Organization, later reprinted in activist outlets, where Assata herself broke silence about Tupac's life, music, and death. And what she said, every hip-hop head needs to hear. Her words, "I love his music even when I don't agree with what he's saying or the premises he's operating on." He was able to touch so much good stuff that most people don't even recognize, much less have the ability to express. Think about that. A revolutionary who sacrificed her homeland, her freedom, her chance at a normal life, still saluted Pac's gift. Even when she disagreed with his direction, she called him a genius, a voice with the rare ability to translate unspoken pain into poetry. But Assata didn't stop at praise. She kept it real. She pointed out the contradictions in Pac's work, the constant push and pull between his panther roots and the gangster persona, between empowerment and destruction, consciousness and materialism. That was the duality of Tupac, a man shaped by revolution, yet consumed by the chaos of the streets. And through Assata's eyes, we see both the brilliance and the burden of that contradiction. After breaking out of prison, Assata found sanctuary in Cuba, where she's been living for decades under political asylum. When asked about being added to the U.S. terrorist list, she didn't hesitate. "This is nothing but a covert attack on Cuba. Every U.S. administration in my lifetime has wanted to crush the Cuban people." For daring to stand on freedom and dignity, she broke it down further, comparing Pac's contradictions to earlier leaders like Huey Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, pointing out that this conflict between chasing justice and chasing power has always been there. She said the system is a mind-destroying machine, working overtime to make us crave money and clout instead of liberation. Then came the words that cut the deepest. To this video that should haunt every Pac fan. Tupac was an exception. He was only 25 when he died. And what saddens me most is that there was no strong community of African revolutionaries to protect him and help guide him. Those who loved him tried their best, but they were competing with dangerous, seductive forces pulling him toward destruction. Read that again. Assata wasn't just grieving Pac. She was indicting the entire movement, saying the people who should have protected him couldn't shield him from the negative energy around him. That's not just mourning, that's accountability. And it stings. Then came the night that changed hip-hop forever. September 7, 1996. Tupac rolled into Las Vegas with Suge Knight and the death row entourage for the Mike Tyson versus Bruce Seldon fight at the MGM Grand Dot after the match. Around 8:45 p.m., Pac and his crew crossed paths with Orlando Anderson, a Southside Crip, in the casino lobby. They jumped him caught on surveillance cameras for the world to see. A few hours later, at 11:15 p.m., while riding down East Flamingo Road in Covell Lane, a white Cadillac pulled up beside Suge's BMW. The back window dropped, and shots rang out from a .40 caliber Glock. Tupac was hit 4 times twice in the chest, once in the arm, once in the thigh. Suge caught shrapnel, but managed to keep the car moving until they reached safety. Paramedics rushed them both to University Medical Center. Pac went under the knife 3 times, one operation even removing his right lung. He was kept sedated, hooked up to life support, his body waging a fight it couldn't win. On September 13, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Amaru Shakur lost that battle. Respiratory failure, cardiac arrest. Just 25 years old, a voice silenced too soon, a legacy immortal. When Assata heard the news, she didn't just break down, she dissected it, like only someone who had survived the full weight of U.S. repression could. In that rare interview, she spoke on what so many suspected, but few dared to say. Asked if COINTELPRO-style tactics could have played a role in Pac's death, she didn't hesitate. It's a definite possibility. Divide and conquer, that's the FBI's specialty. I believe the government fueled the infighting, and I wouldn't be shocked if they set Tupac up more than once. She tied it directly to his music because of the political nature of some of his songs. Even without insider knowledge, I assume he was a government target. Assata wasn't spinning wild theories, she was connecting dots. The FBI's counterintelligence program had already documented its mission: destroy black leaders. By any means necessary: surveillance, infiltration, false charges, provocations. If that's how they treated seasoned activists, why would they spare a 25-year-old megastar with Panther blood in his veins and millions hanging on his every word? But the sharpest this video of her reflection wasn't about government plots, it was about us. The people, the movement, the community. Her words: we must learn from this tragedy. Nothing can bring Tupac back, but we can work to create a world where young people like him can live, can love, and not have to fear some fool with a Glock blowing their brains out. That was Assata Shakur, turning grief into lessons, turning loss into a warning. And when folks kept pushing those wild rumors that Pac staged his own death stories, that resurfaced every September on social media, Assata dismissed it flat out. She called it a distraction, saying people needed to face reality, not chase fantasies. Her reality was brutal. Convicted, handed life plus 30 years. That plus 30 slapped on just because she refused to rise for the judge. She served 6.5 years behind bars, 2 of those years locked away in solitary, inside men's prisons, which was against New Jersey law. But that didn't stop them. The parallels between Assata and Tupac are almost eerie. Both lived under constant government watch. Both slammed with charges they claimed were politically motivated. Both turned into larger-than-life figures of defiance. And both eventually landed on the FBI's most wanted list. Then came May 2nd, 2013, exactly 40 years after the Turnpike shootout. The FBI added Assata Shakur to its most wanted terrorist list, the first woman ever placed there. They even threw $2 million on her head, split between the Bureau and New Jersey. The move blew up headlines. The Center for Constitutional Rights called it a stunt, a way to stir up fear and keep COINTELPRO's playbook alive. Critics argued it wasn't about justice, it was political theater meant to squeeze Cuba. But Cuba didn't fold. They sheltered Assata, refusing every U.S. demand for extradition. From there, she worked as an English editor for Radio Havana and became a global symbol of resistance. Her influence stretched far past politics, deep into culture. She inspired Black Lives Matter organizations like Assata's Daughters, and left fingerprints all over hip-hop.com, and honored her with a track in 2000, weaving her story into a soulful beat with her own voice sampled. Public Enemy shouted her out as Chesimer back in 1988. The Roots dropped her name. In 96, Saul Williams coded her into his poetry. In 2001, even Jay-Z sampled her voice. Her reach was undeniable. Assata Shakur had become something bigger than a fugitive, almost like a patron saint of conscious rap, a living icon whose story still fuels movements today. Hip-hop was never just party tracks. It could be rebellion, revolution, knowledge wrapped in beats. And then history threw a curveball. In September 2023, almost 27 years after Tupac's murder, Las Vegas police finally arrested Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, charging him with first-degree murder for allegedly setting up the hit that ended Pac's life. The crazy this video? Davis had already put himself in the crosshairs. The crazy this video? Davis had already put himself in the crosshairs. In his 2019 memoir Compton Street Legend and in multiple interviews, he bragged about being in the white Cadillac and supplying the weapon. But then came the jaw-dropper. In those same confessions, Keefe D. claimed that Sean Diddy Combs had floated a $1 million bounty to take out both Tupac and Suge Knight. Gene Deal. Diddy's former bodyguard doubled down on that story, saying the feds should follow the paper trail, pointing specifically to a $1 million check he swore he'd seen. Diddy, for this video, denied everything, blasting the claims as absurd and completely false. Vegas authorities also stressed that Diddy has never been considered a suspect. Still, Pac's family isn't letting it slide. In October 2024, they hired attorney Alex Spiro to dig deeper into any possible Diddy connection. Meanwhile, Keefe D's trial is scheduled for February 2026, a case that could finally expose secrets buried for nearly 30 years. While all this unfolded, Assata Shaker was living out her days in Cuba. In rare interviews, she admitted she missed African-American culture, friends, family, the rhythms of home. She said learning Spanish had been a struggle, those first years leaving her feeling like a fool who couldn't truly express herself. But despite the challenges, Cuba gave her something America never had: peace. For the first time in her life, she lived in a society that wasn't hostile to her existence. She described it as finally being able to breathe, to heal after decades of persecution. And in her words, it was the first time she had ever actually liked a president. For the first time in her life, Assata Shaker said she truly felt peace. In Cuba, she could walk the streets at any hour, even at 3 a.m. if the urge hit her, without fear, without harassment. It was a freedom she had never known in the U.S. there. She finally built a deep bond with her daughter, born while she was behind bars. In exile, Assata taught, studied, wrote, even earned a master's in social science. But through it all, she never stopped being a revolutionary. Her voice stayed fiery, uncompromising. In interviews, she broke down racism, imperialism, and the need for healing in oppressed communities, always tying personal pain back to the bigger struggle. We have to educate ourselves and prepare to fight a system that crushes the human spirit. She said, a system that makes people forget how to walk freely, how to smile, how to simply say good morning. We've got to take this planet back from the beast controlling it. When Assata Shaker passed away on September 25, 2025, tributes poured in worldwide. Black Lives Matter, the Chicago Teachers Union, and countless grassroots movements honored her as a freedom fighter. Critics like New Jersey's governor blasted those tributes as disgraceful, but the divide was nothing new. Assata had always split opinion, revered by some, condemned by others. But in the end, what mattered most wasn't the judgment of politicians or FBI press releases. It was the meaning of her struggle and the legacy she left behind in the streets. A legacy carried strongest through the music and memory of her godson, Tupac Shaker. When Pac declared in words of wisdom, Assata Shaker, America's nightmare, it wasn't just a shout-out. It was a declaration of lineage, a vow to keep the fight alive. The contrast between their fates is haunting. Assata found peace in exile, living until 78. Tupac never made it past 25, trapped in paranoia, surrounded by enemies, and gunned down in a war he didn't start, but couldn't escape. Assata beat the system. Pac couldn't. That's the tragedy. That's the lesson. Tupac got swallowed by it. And here's the key point: Assata never tried to put herself above him. She didn't blame Pac for his choices. She blamed the system that failed to protect him. She said he needed guidance, a shield, a revolutionary community around him, and it wasn't there. The music industry, the streets, the pressure, it was too much for one man to carry alone. No matter his lineage. This flips the whole way we think about Pac. His story isn't about weakness or bad decisions. It's about what happens when you're born into a war that's already raging. When your very name comes from a martyred revolutionary. When your godmother is a fugitive on the FBI's most wanted list. When your family's love language is sacrifice, struggle, and survival. Assata once said, as long as imperialism exists, you will have racism. That wasn't despair, it was analysis. And it ties directly to Tupac's death. It wasn't just about gangs or the East versus West feud. It was about the violence of empire, working through young men boxed in by poverty, denied alternatives, denied futures. The same machine that put Asada in front of an all-white jury, shot her with her hands raised, and drove her into exile. That same machine laid the groundwork for Pac to bleed out on a Vegas street. Different battlefield, same war. Her autobiography ends with her in Cuba, writing about finally finding peace. But she never forgot her roots. She never stopped speaking out, never stopped teaching. Her legacy echoed in Pac's rhymes, in every conscious MC who came after him, in every protest that carried her words, in every movement built on her refusal to break. And her last lesson on Tupac wasn't about wild theories or shadowy plots. It was sharper than that, more grounded. Talent isn't enough. Genius isn't enough. Even heart isn't enough. What's needed is community, protection, guidance, love, space to grow. That's what Pac didn't have. That's what Asada knew he needed, but only when it was too late. In one of her final public reflections, she said, "We need to create a world where the Tupacs of the world can grow in love, and not fear that some fool with a Glock is going to blow their brains out." She wasn't just talking about Tupac. She was talking about every young black kid, every voice from the hood, every potential revolutionary whose flame gets snuffed out too early. Click on one of the cards on your screen to keep this story alive.